There's just flow. And so remember I said earlier, this idea of impermanence, if we really appreciate it, we're very close to this. Because if we understand that at the physical world there's just flow, at the mental world there's just flow, then the me is just labelled on that flow. So where is that objective me? There's nowhere to be found. Just like you can't find a cup in that flow objectively, because a cup is merely labelled on the flow. Just like you can't find the mind, because mind is merely labelled on that flow of experience. And just going on a little bit more on that, I just want to add something to that in the text. It says, when you have gained experience in cultivating the selfnesses of person, means the emptiness of person within your own continuum, and it's quoting this perfection of wisdom of 8,000 verses, just as with the self know all sentient beings in a similar way, just as with sentient beings know all phenomena in a similar way. So what it's saying here is that the recommended procedure is we first start with me, the person. Where is the me that seems to be here? Once we become familiar with that and see there's no me to be found, then we can expand out to other people and to other phenomena. Particularly the body and the mind is a good next step. And then there's a quote here, and it says, thus now indicating the way of meditating on selfnesses of other persons' phenomena, again quoting Nagarjuna, he says, similarly, each of those elements are not ultimates, since they too are collections. So the elements were the basis, the body and the mind. So again, what we saw there is that the person is not findable because the person is merely labelled on the basis of the body and the mind. We go down one level to the body and the mind. The body is not findable because the body is something merely labelled on a collection of parts. And we can keep going down, 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 down. Similarly with the mind, keep going down, down, down. There's no bottom. There's no objective basis to anything because everything is merely labelled on its parts. But then you might say, well, but hang on, isn't there a world out there if we're not here still? Well, according to this, no. How can there be? And actually, we see this a little bit, something similar to this, in what's called quantum cosmology. So quantum physics, of course, is investigating the most smallest aspects of reality. And there, of course, in quantum physics, there's a lot of talk about the fact that everything's in what's called a superposition state, sort of a potential state, and it's only the act of observation where the wave function collapses and then you actually have something. Mm-hmm. Sounds very similar to this, merely labelled. But then some quantum physicists apply these quantum physics principles to the macroscopic world. The mathematics they use for the macroscopic world is called quantum cosmology. And when they do that, something very interesting happens. Is that when they apply that mathematics to the macroscopic world, time drops out of the equation. There's no time. Time disappears in the universe. Time only comes in if you introduce an observer. And actually this is, again, Andre Linde, the professor of physics at Stanford University, he says the following. He says, without introducing an observer, we have a dead universe which does not evolve in time. And this re-emphasises the role of the participant in a self-observing universe of quantum cosmology. The universe becomes alive, i.e. time-dependent, only when one divides it into two parts, a subjective observer and the rest of the objective universe. And the wave function of the rest of the objective universe depends on the time measured by the observer. In other words, the evolution of the universe and everything in it, including life itself, is possible only with respect to the observer. and here's something a little bit more, also more interesting. And this is coming from a book called Mind in the Balance from Alan Wallace, and he says the following. He says, some contemporary physicists go even further in challenging the commonplace assumptions about the history of the universe. I mean, normally the history of the universe is presented in terms of the Big Bang, and from the Big Bang everything evolved to where we are now. But he's saying some physicists are challenging that now. And he says, applying the principles of quantum physics to the whole of nature, Stephen Hawking and Thomas Hertog, who's from CERN, have proposed that there is no absolutely objective history of the universe as it exists independently of all systems of measurements and conceptual modes of inquiry. Instead, there are many possible histories, among which scientists select one or more based on their specific methods of inquiry. Since the dawn of modern science, physicists have been trying to understand the evolution of the universe from the bottom up, starting from the initial conditions. Today, the beginning of the universe is conceived in terms of the Big Bang, but Hawking and Hertog challenge this entire approach, declaring that like the surface of a sphere, our universe has no definable starting point, no defined initial state. And if you can't know the initial state of the universe, you can't take a bottom-up approach working forward from the beginning. The only alternative is to take a top-down approach, starting with current observations and working backward. But how you do this depends entirely on the questions you ask and the methods of inquiry you adopt in the present. When we apply the principles of quantum physics to the entire universe, as Wheeler and Zeilinger advocate, so Wheeler and Zeilinger were these very well-known physicists, the whole of nature exists in a quantum superposition state consisting of an infinite array of possibilities. According to Hawking, every possible version of a single universe exists simultaneously in that quantum superposition. When you choose to make a measurement, you select from this range of possibilities a subset of histories that share the specific features measured. The history of the universe as you conceive of it is derived from that subset of histories. In other words, you choose your past. Interesting? Any questions? Because now we're moving on to a different section of the text of what we've covered here.
Is there any explanation to the identity of the observer?
In quantum physics?
No. Actually, both in quantum physics and in our practice, like at the end of after you dig down, those who made the whole way, what is the identity of the observer?
Well, I don't claim to know much at all about quantum physics, but certainly I think there's uniform consensus that you need observer. But what that observer is, they don't touch. They don't want to go there. So they sort of leave it they just say that we need an observer. So they don't really, I don't think, talk about consciousness or anything like that in quantum physics. But certainly, from a Buddhist perspective, then observer is, again, a label we're applying to a basis. I mean, we could say we are the observer. We are observing the universe, as in person. You could say the observer is the mind. I mean, again, there's no objective observer to be found anywhere. Observer is a label applied to a basis. But of course that basis in Buddhism includes consciousness, includes mind, which I think quantum physics don't really want to talk about because they don't know how to address that because they're still addressing physical reality.
That implies that the universe, the past, future, whatever, is depending on the quantity or quality of our mind, in my terms, of our brain.
brain.
The limit of human brain, of its capacity, is dictating the past and future of the universe. This is the observer. This is the quantity and quality of the observer.
Right, but here we mentioned earlier that, well, first point, of course, in Buddhism, the mind is not the brain, so that's the first point.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
No matter what you call it.
Sure, but the mind is not physical in Buddhism.
But it still has a certain capacity or limits. It's not.
Well, that's the question.
Buddha.
That's the question, is that our coarse mind has limit, but when we go down, then particularly we get to the very subtle mind. Of course, in Buddhism, the very subtle mind is the ground state of consciousness, and in fact, everything arises from that, including time-space. So there's no limit there.
This is an assumption.
Well, no, it's based on meditators' experiences. I mean, it's an assumption for us, of course, for us. I mean, unless we've had that experience, it's just a theory, of course, for us. But, of course, there are Buddhist meditators who have come to this experience, and that's what, I mean, whether their experiences are valid, we need to check. But, I mean, it seems like there have been countless meditators who've come to the same result. So that would seem to confer that it's not just some hallucination. But, of course, the thing is, for us, the way to check that is to gain access ourselves, and then we'll see. We'll see if that's true or not.
We still have the same limitation in our mind, no matter if it is a great meditator or not, because if the mind is a human mind, so it...
But that's the point, is that the subtle mind is not human. The coarse mind that we have is human.
You assume that the subtle mind has bigger capacity than
Not
the
assuming. You
human mind.
do shamatha practice and you'll find out. You'll find out. As long as, of course, we're in the coarse mind that is based on this brain, yes, there's a lot of limitations, because in the coarse mind there's also lots of mental afflictions, ignorance, all sorts of things. There's a lot of limitation there. But you drop down below that, there's no limitation. But of course, we need to discover that for ourselves. Otherwise, it's just another theory. No? Just another theory. And yeah, so the answer is to do the shamatha practice, to drop down to that more subtle level and see what your experience is. And the experience of countless meditators is the limits sort of drop away very quickly.
I tend, after I sit for meditation and investigate if the I exist and the body exists and the mind exists, and let's say I came to the point where I know that it doesn't, when I feel that it doesn't.
Yeah, we're not saying there's... You have to be very clear about the way you say it.
Yeah, but
There is a body, there is a mind, there is a person. There's no independent.
Okay. The thing is that
Better to say not exist, not findable.
not findable.
That's better.
Okay. Not findable, then I somehow tend to look for the mind that investigates.
Sure, good, you can do that. You can do that. But then you're doing another practice.
Is it in the same context of the same practice? Should I do that? Like go on investigating what is? Because I go
Yeah.
in a place where it's not findable at all.
Right, good.
But like never-ending thing, like if I look for the thing that is unending, I never found it, like this, I can't get to the point where the investigation stops.
Because the investigation can stop if you look for the observer. If you look for the observer, then
The
then...
mind is observing.
Sorry? Is it? Did you find it?
No, so what?
Then you just stop there. You just stop
So
there.
I stop there.
Yeah. Because there's no observer to be found. So why are we looking for the observer
I
again?
don't know. But I sort of find myself looking further, and is that a mistake?
Yeah, I mean, because we can look for anything in the meditation, but then we need to do what we set out to do. Because often people look and then they start looking for something else. And
So it won't be like...
so if you're looking for the person, look for the person. If you don't find, just stay there. If you're looking for the body, if you don't find, stay there. If you're looking for the mind, stay there. If you're looking for the observer and you don't find, stay there. Otherwise you just go round and round.
That's exactly what...
I mean, that would be like, we're looking for a person in a room, we don't find, oh, let's go around again and look again. We keep going.
Thank you.
I would like to ask if the observer is part of the karma.
Karma. So, karma, isn't karma a concept that was developed to help describe this? Can you point to karma? Is karma objective? No.
But the observer is causes and effects, or like...
Again, observer is a label. I mean, we can apply observer to the body and the mind. Say, I'm observing. We can apply the label observer to just the mind. We can apply the label to all sorts of things.
So it's not changing? Is it changing?
What's your experience? Is it changing? If something's not changing, it can't function, can it? Isn't there a flow of observation? Maybe it's changing then.
To the concept of no time, I'm having trouble to grasp this, especially
No
because
time.
the concept of there are no things moving in time,
Okay. There's no static thing moving through time.
and there's no concept of time through. You described it with a quantum physics.
Yeah, in quantum cosmology, they're saying that you can only have time with respect to an observer. What they're saying is that if you apply quantum physics principles to the universe and there's no observer, then it's a frozen universe. It can't evolve.
And
There's no time except with respect to the observer.
I get that, but also I don't see how it can exist when there are trees outside that needs time to grow, or like...
But isn't time a concept that we've developed?
I agree with that, but
Right.
also there...
So we're saying time exists. No one's saying time doesn't exist. We're just saying, does it exist objectively?
No. But there is a continuation of, I guess, moments that...
Yeah, but isn't moment an idea we've created to explain?
So how do you then describe time in a non-conceptual way? Like...
You don't. I mean, just like cup. It's a concept time.
I get that, but
Right.
also how do you then think about how the universe evolved to be the way it is since...
By using concepts such as time to talk about evolution.
I think the changes prove the time, no?
But change is a concept. No? Isn't it?
But they're physical manifestations of change. Like you can see change.
Right, I mean, like cup is not just a label that doesn't have meaning. Cup is applied to a basis. I mean, time is applied to a basis. All of these things are applied to a basis. I mean, otherwise they would be meaningless. So, they're functioning, but they're merely labelled.
Yeah, but changes you can see. I mean, changes you can see.
Yeah, but even the word change is a concept to help understand this, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you talk about any word is a concept. Any word you say is
Correct.
a concept.
Correct. And we need them. We need them to be able to function. So there's no problem with concepts. In fact, we must have them, otherwise we couldn't understand anything. The problem is we don't understand concepts to be concepts. We make them objective things. Cups, time, impermanence, objective. That's the problem.
The subtle body and the subtle mind that you say that can move through, not move, can
In the death process, you mean? Or?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, in the
Yeah, it's shutting down in the death process. Just like the course body.
The very subtle, the very subtle also shut, or it's
No, that's always there.
It's always there.
And then the next moment we then get... Huh?
This is the karma. The very,
No. Remember, the very subtle is not individuated. Remember, the very subtle mind is the source of time and space. So when they talk about karma, and again, karma is not some objective thing like anything else. Normally, that concept to describe this is, of course, relative to the more subtle level, not the very subtle, because very subtle is not individuated. You can't say my very subtle mind and your very subtle mind. It just doesn't make any sense. But I can talk about my subtle mind and your subtle mind, and it's at this level then often the principles of karma are described at that
also
level.
But also the karma does the imprint of karma. I mean,
Yeah, but again, imprint is just a concept. Imprint of karma. Imprint is not a thing moving through time. In fact, there are some systems of Buddhism that describe karma without the concept of imprint. They never use that word. They talk about, no, I won't go into it, it's a bit. But there are, like in the Prasangika philosophical system, there's no karma, there's no such thing as imprint. They don't use that idea. And they can still describe the same processes using a different way of describing. So again, karmic imprint is not a thing that is sort of moving from one life to the next. No such thing.
Then what does?
Nothing.
Then how can you talk about reincarnation if
Because just like this cup is reborn in every moment, so are we in this very life. Isn't it? Aren't we being reborn in every moment in this life? Aren't we? So there's no static thing that is moving from one moment to the next in our life. This body's certainly not, the mind is not, nothing is. Yet, we can talk about me. No?
thank you.
Okay. Let's go on a little bit in the text. So he said we're in accordance with that. It says, when you search and you do not find even a mere trace of a meditative equipoise, a meditator and so forth, at that time sustain space-like meditative equipoise single-pointedly without distraction. So again, if whatever emptiness practice we're doing, if we get to the point of not finding, then we stop, we hold that experience as long as we can. That's what's being said here. This is this space-like meditative equipoise. It is said at the time of not finding even a mere trace of inherent existence, not finding is the supreme finding, and not seeing is the true seeing. Because why it's called supreme finding, true seeing, is of course we're realising emptiness. So when the ultimate nature of the mind is seen, when the nature of the mind that is has been pointed out, then from within that very state sustains space-like meditative equipoise upon the ultimate nature, the mere negation of true existence single-pointedly without distraction. So again, here it's talking about when we're investigating the mind and we're looking for the mind and we don't see the mind, we don't find the mind, then rest in that experience of emptiness of the mind. And then the next paragraph says, alternatively, since the extremely subtle wind mind is said to be the subtle basis of designation of I, so remember, we said that through that death process, the basis of designation, now, of course, in our life, the basis of designation of me is this body and the coarse mind that we have. And when we're going through the death process, the basis of designation then becomes the subtle body and the subtle mind, and eventually the very subtle body and very subtle mind, and that's what's being referred to here. And it says also those who give oral instructions except pointing out the mind when determining the ultimate nature of the mind, I shall instruct in accordance with that. So now he's going to give some instructions about Vipassana practice with respect to the mind. So he says the following. Within that state of the previous continuity of meditative equipoise, so again, what he's saying here is that on the basis of a shamatha, on the basis of a calm, clear, focused mind, then we can investigate. He said, if you investigate the mind, and the mind is that which has a pure vacuity, not established in any way as a physical entity, is unobscured like a sun free of clouds, with diverse thoughts dawning and thus proliferating, so mind has lots of things arising in it, is unceasing like a butter lamp that does not go out, so the mind is a continuum that doesn't stop, and operates as an uninterrupted continuum of clarity and awareness. When you investigate that mind, then it says, then to the awareness that apprehends one's own mind, it appears to be independent and not reliant upon anything else whatsoever. So again, like everything else, the mind, if we look at our mind, the mind really appears to exist objectively there independently. It doesn't seem to depend on anything else to exist. And it says the conceived object is apprehended to exist as it appears. So the mind appears to exist there objectively, independently, and we accept that. We grasp onto the mind existing independently. But then he goes on to say, however, the mind that appears in such a way is said in Master Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So he's now quoting Shantideva's text. He says, Shantideva, those things that are said to be a continuum or a collection are falsities, just like a rosary, an army, and so forth. And then he's commented here, he's saying, having threaded together the individual beads of a rosary, there is the mere designation rosary. And having assembled together the individuals who carry weapons, there is a mere designation army. Other than that, they do not inherently exist. So he's using these examples to talk about the mind, saying anything that is a continuum or collection doesn't exist objectively. Example, the rosary or a mala. There seems to be a rosary there, one thing there existing objectively, but if you look closely, all there is a number of beads with a string through the middle. There's nothing more than that. And so then mala or rosary is simply a label we're applying to that collection of many beads and a bit of string. Similarly, here the designation of army is that all we see there's maybe soldiers and weapons and so forth. And then army is simply a label we apply to that collection of many things. Similarly, we have also here often in the text is the example of a forest. Forest is simply a label we're applying to a collection of many things, of trees. So there's no forest there to be found objectively because all you find or see is trees. And of course, if you look more closely, then there's branches and leaves and roots and so forth. There's no forest there. Forest is just a label we're applying to that collection of many trees, like the army, like the mala, like the rosary. Similarly, the mind is not to be found because mind is simply a label we're applying to a collection of many moments of experience. So there's no mind objectively there. And then it says, by using such scriptures and reasoning, equipoise single-pointedly within a state where you ascertain that the mind does not exist in the way it appears. So again, when we're searching for the mind, we don't find the mind, then we stop the search and rest in that experience of not finding the mind. That's an experience of emptiness with respect to the mind. And then there's a quote here, it says, furthermore, as said in the Perfection of Wisdom of 8,000 verses, there is no mind in the mind. The nature of the mind is clear light. And so he's commenting what that means. He says, this states that there is no inherently existent mind in the mind, means you can't find the mind there.